Alright, so this video is going to cover creating low poly trees and some low poly geometry and background stuff for environments in 3ds Max. Okay, so the point of this is to keep things low poly so that we can copy a lot of these trees in the background. So if you want to do a low poly style of art, or if you want to do like a paper style of art, you can use these trees for that. You can also just use these trees as background in a more realistic scene. These are low poly, so we can use object paint to paint these across the entire scene if you want to. I have a bunch of trees lined up here, and I'm going to hide those in a minute, and I'll explain how to create each of these different types of trees. I'll also go over the clouds up here, how those were made. We'll talk a bit about the terrain and just creating a river like this and blocking in a terrain like mountains, and I'll also talk a little bit about lighting. Okay, so we'll get started. I'm going to hide everything except for these trees in the front, and then we'll start from there. Okay, so I'm going to hide my default layer. I've got my trees and clouds separate. And we'll just start with these trees right here. So I'm just going to turn my background back to gray for now. So if you're ever trying to change your background or show an image in the background, you can go up to viewport configuration and you can actually change it right here. So right now I have it using my environment background, which I changed to orange, but I'm going to set this back to the default. We'll just have a solid color here. Okay. So first thing I'll note is that these trees are low poly, so to get the effect that we're looking for, and I'll do a quick render here, you want to make sure that you turn off all smoothing. So all the geometry we create, we're going to be careful to turn off smoothing because we want to get these weird angles and these shapes and shadows under the tree. If we turn on smoothing, it's going to try to smooth the surface together, and this isn't going to work as well. So the whole point is to keep things really low poly and really simple, so we can put this scene together pretty fast. Okay, so I'll start by recreating these two trees right here. I'll just move this one over. We'll start from scratch. So first thing is, under Customize, Unit Setup. If you want to follow along with the same units, I'm using US Standard feet in inches. So it's feet with fractional inches, measuring by 1/4 inch. That way I can just punch in numbers here and know how tall everything is. So I'm going to make sure I'm working in an active layer. So I'm in my trees layer. I'll make sure it's active up here. Okay, so this is two objects and it's pretty simple. We're going to use a box. So I'm going to start by creating a box. We'll just click and drag up something like this, and then I'll give you numbers to punch in. So make sure you have shaded with edged faces turned on. Okay, so F4 is the shortcut for edged faces, F3 is wireframe. Okay, so for the height you can punch in something like 10. For the width we'll just go 1 by 1 for now. And for the length, width and height segments, we'll actually put in 3 height segments. Actually, sorry, we'll make that 4. So that's going to give us 3 edge loops in the middle. Okay, so we're going to take this and convert it to editable poly. So right click, convert to editable poly. And from here, the first thing you can do is select all the polygons. So click and drag. Make sure everything's selected. If your polygons are see-through like this, you can hit F2, and that just hides the shaded face. I'm going to scroll down towards the bottom and you'll see polygon smoothing groups. Looks like a calendar. So this, we're going to hit clear all and remove all smoothing groups on this. Okay, so once that's done, you can use any sub-object selection here. I'm going to use vertex, and I'm going to click and drag around the verts at the bottom and just use the scale tool Okay, so I'm using select and uniform scale, and I'm just going to taper out the bottom of my tree trunk. Okay, so you can go up through each set of vertices or edge loop, and you can just reshape your tree. If you want to scale the whole thing out, you can grab all the verts and scale them out. So I'm only scaling between the X and Y right now. Okay, so we get something like this. So the next trick to this is for most of these trees, we're gonna get a weird shape or angle, but we're not gonna model that in. And let me just fix this a little bit. Instead, we're gonna use modifiers to try and change the shapes of these tree trunks and including the tree tops as well. Okay, so we're going to add a noise modifier to almost everything we do here. So if you go down into your modifier list, you can add noise, and the first thing you can do is push the strength up. So we'll put the X and the Y up, so I'm not going to adjust the Z. I don't want to distort the bottom of this one. And then to really see this work, you're going to pull the scale down. So as I start pulling the scale down, it's going to twist this, and you want to make sure there's enough strength in here. So something like 2 by 2 is going to be quite a bit. And if you pull your scale too far down, it's going to distort it too much. So we want to be somewhere between 30 and 50 probably. And I might make this 1 and 1. A little bit less. Okay, so you can twist this up using noise and just adjusting scale and the strength. And if we copy this around, you can just change the seed and you can create different shapes. So you can make each tree unique. Just make sure you pick a seed that's not too distorted. Okay, so I'll make sure this is centered. So X and Y is centered, and then you can name this tree trunk. I'll call it tree trunk basic. Alright, so on top of this, we're going to create the crown or the top of the tree. So for this one, we're going to go to Geosphere. Okay, so if you click and drag, you can create the Geosphere. You can use the Align tool to line it up, or you can just center it and move it up. And we'll put it up here like this. Okay, so I used a Geosphere for all these different trees, the round tops. And you'll notice how this one, it's just a triangulated sphere. And if you go into the Modify panel, you're going to see under Geodesic Base Type, there's 3 types that you can toggle between. Okay, so if I go down to Octa, you'll see it's a lower poly tree, and then Tetra is even more low poly. But you can add segments to each of these. So if I add segments here, you can see how it just increases the tessellation. So for this one, instead of converting it to editable poly and removing smoothing groups, you can just uncheck smooth here, and then you'll get this low poly effect. So on top of this, you can add a noise modifier again. And this time I'm going to punch in 2, 2, and 2. And you can even push this farther on the treetop. So I'll make it 3, 3, and 3. So we're going to include the Z this time. And again, you can change the scale of the noise, and you can really twist the top of the tree up. So we're just creating unique shapes without modeling. We're just using modifiers. And again, you can change the seed and get a different type of tree. So if I wanted to copy this around and just make each one unique, just change the seed here. Okay, so I would call that done for the first low poly tree. We just have to put the materials on. But before I do, I'll just note, if you go back to Geosphere, just make sure Show on Result is turned on, and you'll see the noise up here. And you can still play with these and create different shapes up here. So you can see if I go up to the third option here, it's a much chunkier treetop, and this might be something you would prefer. So maybe this is too low poly and you want to go with something like that, that's fine. You can even add more segments, and it's really the noise that's breaking this up. If I turn that noise off or if I turn off show end result, it just looks like a sphere. Okay, so the trick is in using the noise modifier. So I'm going to put this back to the low poly one for now. So the next thing is we need to create materials. So we'll start doing that now. And I'm going to go up to utilities and reset my materials. So you might notice that my materials have kind of a brown tint to them, and that's because I've changed the ambient color for the global ambient. So if you go up to rendering and environment, you can change your global ambient light up here. By default it should be set to black, so I'm going to set mine back to black and we'll come back to this later. Okay, so I'm going to start creating some new materials. We'll make one for the trunk and one for the top. So we'll have tree trunk basic brown, and I'll just copy this and paste it here, and we'll have tree top basic brown. Actually, sorry, tree top basic green, not brown. Okay, so this, for the materials for this, it's as simple as changing the color. So I'm going to make a green for the top, a brown for the bottom, and then we'll just apply these to the trunk and the treetop. So you can just click and drag and then let go, and that's it. Now you can use texture maps in here, that's no problem. If you wanted to unwrap this and take it into Mudbox and paint a custom map on here, you absolutely could. You could also use the viewport canvas here. So if you go to tools, viewport canvas, you can create a texture map to paint in here. Another thing you can do is add bump maps. So if you really wanted this to look like paper, you could go into the bump section and you could load a bump in here. So I'll show you an example just to have a look. So I'm going to load a bitmap, and I do have a paper texture somewhere. Okay, so somewhere in here I've got paper, and if I grab one of these, this one would be good. You should see the bump in here. So I'm going to take that and copy it from the trunk and paste it in here as well. And then you can see it breaks it up and it just looks like more like paper. So if I wanted to apply this to the tree, it's already applied now. If I turn on show shaded material in viewport, I'm not going to see this bump. If you hold your mouse button down, you can choose show realistic material in viewport, and then you'll see your bump map in here. Okay, so this uses a little more memory, but if you want to see your bump active in the viewport, you have to do it that way. And I also suggest, I'm going to turn both of these ones on. I also suggest that you UV map, because we created these shapes without UV mapping it. So I'm going to close my material now, and we'll take each one of these and add a UVW map modifier on top. Okay, so just a basic UV map modifier, and then you can choose box mapping, and then I would punch in a square value here like 10 by 10. And I'll do the same thing with the trunk. So if we have a render, we'll just see what it looks like. So Shift Q. Okay, so that's the render with that paper bump map applied to it. Okay, so this is without showing a ground plane or lights bouncing or anything like that. So I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to remove the bump maps for now. I'm just going to turn them off and keep everything really simple. Okay, so this would be a good time to save the file. I'm just going to click Save As. I've got it set up already. Hit the plus, and then we'll move on and do another tree. Alright, so I'm going to take these trees. I'll just move them over out of the way. I'm going to take this one, and we're going to create a tree like this tall one on the side. So I'm going to hold Shift, just make a copy. Okay, so you want to double check that you're naming things. So right now this is named Trunk Basic. I didn't name the top, is still Geosphere. So I'm going to call this Tree Top Basic. Okay, so I'll just slide all this stuff down a bit. And for this one, we're just going to take the top and we'll get rid of the UV map, and I'm going to delete noise for now. And on top of the geosphere this time, I'm going to add a twist modifier. So even before I do this though, I'm going to take this and scale it up. Okay, so I don't plan on linking this or rigging it or animating it in any way, so I'm just going to scale this straight up. Okay, so we've got a top something like this. If you want, you can take your bottom and you can scale that up as well. So I'm going to take this top piece and I'm going to go ahead and add a twist modifier. Okay, so the twist modifier is going to take this geometry, and as we start cranking the angle around like this, it's just going to twist it up. So we're creating a different shape at the top here. Now if you want to add more segments, you just drop back down to Geosphere, make sure Show End Results turned on, and you can switch between these to get a different shape completely. Or you can just add a few segments to the base one. And then you can go back to twist. You could twist this a little bit further. And you can really break this up even further by adding your noise back on top. Okay, so I'm going to add my noise modifier again. And we'll break this one up using the same values, 3, 3, and 3. And just adjusting the scale. Okay, so even with the noise on, you could still drop back down to the geosphere, and if you want to add more segments, or if you decide you want to choose one of the different options to break it up, then that's fine. Okay, so as you're doing this, you might want to give it a render. Just make sure everything's rendering fine. There's nothing overlapping too bad. So I'm just looking for the dark shadows in here, the low poly paper effect. And then once you get a shape you're happy with, you can leave it like that. Okay, so you'll notice on the side I have some of these different trees with the different branches sticking out. So I'm going to take the one I just made and I'm going to make sure to name everything. So we'll call this, I'll just copy the name from this one here. Basic tall, or you can call it basic stretched. So I'll just take this one now and move it over here, and we'll create another one. And again, you can just copy the first tree trunk that you made, and we'll just center it, and we'll start with this. Okay, so this one, I'm going to delete the UV map off of there, and I'll delete the noise modifier for now. You actually don't have to delete this. You can go down to editable poly, and we're just going to grab these vertices and move them up. So we're going to make this taller. Okay, this one I'll leave close to the bottom for the taper. And I'm going to spread these ones out a bit. Okay, so for this one, we're going to extrude some branches, but we need to divide this section up here. So I'm going to grab all these edges. You can click and drag like this, or if you click on one like this and hold Shift, you can select the one beside it. It'll grab a ring. You can also click on one edge and hit ring over here. It's the same thing. If you double click an edge, it's going to select a loop, so it loops all the way around. Okay, so this doesn't continue here, so it stops at the top. So that's the same as clicking on an edge and hitting loop here. Okay, so I want this ring of edges here, and I'm going to use connect under edit edges, but I'm going to use connect settings. So in the settings, I'm going to increase the segments. So we'll make 3. So we basically want to divide this up into even square sections that we can extrude branches from. Okay, so I'm going to click OK. There's several ways you can extrude your branch. You can click on polygon, and you can select the polygon you want to extrude, and then just use the extrude tool and pull it out. Okay, so you can pull this out, and then from here you can move it. You can scale it to taper it, and then you can rotate it to extrude another section. Okay, so now I can grab this, do the same thing. So I could pull this up in the view, or if you want, you can switch from view to local, and you can pull this along the local axis. Okay, so if you want to twist it up a bit, just grab your vertices at the elbow joint here, and you can move these around. So I'm going to keep mine in view, and then you can just shift this stuff around. Okay, so I'll make another one over here. This time I'll use bevel. So if you open up your bevel settings, you can push the height and the outline at the same time. So you can push these together like this, and then just click apply and continue. And then if you rotate it from here, it rotates it from that joint. And then you can shift this around. Okay, so that one's already done. I'll click OK. So I can just keep going around and extruding things. Okay, so you can add as many branches as you want. Once you're done, you can take the top. I'll just push this up and taper it in. This will probably get hidden anyways because we're going to put the top of the tree up there. Okay, so we're going to reuse the top of this tree here. So I'm just going to hold shift, drag a copy of it over. And from here you can, I'm going to collapse this. Actually, I'm just going to delete this UV map off of here. So under the noise, you can change the seed. So if we change the seed, we're just creating a different shape, making it a bit more random. You can also take these and rotate them each time you copy them, just to make sure it doesn't look like a repeated pattern. So I'm going to keep copying these around. So if you're going to make changes to this, you want to make a copy. If you're just going to rotate and spin it around, you can make it an instance, and then you can save memory in your scene as well. Okay, so I'll just keep making copies for now. I'm going to scale this one down a bit. I'll change the seed. And then we'll just rotate it around and put it down here. Okay, so if you want to break up the colors, you can create some new materials. I'll just copy this green over, make some different greens. Make a green light and a green dark. And then just remember to go back and change the colors up a bit. The light one on there and the dark one over here, and break the tree up a bit like that. Okay, so we can grab this and we'll put another one at the back here. So I'm holding Alt and the middle mouse button to rotate. Okay, so just in case you're trying to figure out how I'm rotating around the scene, I'm not using the orbit sub-object tool all the time. I'm just holding Alt and middle mouse button, and then you can hit Z to zoom into whatever's selected. Okay, so that's a zoom or a focus. Okay. Okay, so at the moment I haven't attached or grouped anything together, so if you just wanted to copy a few of these around, you could select them like this, and you could go up here and group and make a group. But I'm going to end up attaching this stuff later because I'm going to show you how to use Object Paint. Okay, so we've got a few different trees in here already. I'll show how to do these ones after. The last thing we'll do before we get there is we'll create a couple of these pine trees here. Okay, so I'm going to take these and space them out a bit. And again, you can just start by taking your first trunk, hold Shift, drag it over here. Okay, so you might just be dragging yours a little closer, but I'm heading over here right now. So for this, there's a couple different shapes here. The simplest one is this, it's just a cone. And I'll go ahead and make the cone one right now since it's going to be quick. So you're just creating a cone shape. You can click and drag. When you get to the top, you're going to pull this in. And you can also adjust this over here. It's just radius 1 is the bottom, radius 2 is the top, which we've pushed all the way in. And then you want about 5 height segments in here. Okay, so all we're doing to this is adding a twist and a noise. So if you go to Twist, and actually before we do that, make sure to turn off Smooth so that you get the low poly angled effect again. And we'll go ahead and add the Twist modifier. So I'm just going to crank this around like this. And again, you can make this more low poly by going back to your cone and taking away some of the sides. Okay, so right now there's 24 sides. I'm going to split that in half and make it 12. Okay, so on top of the twist, we can also add the noise modifier again. And the noise is just going to push the edges out and make it look a little more chunky. Okay, so this one you can just add the noise in the X and Y if you don't want the bottom to distort, or if you want the bottom to look rough as well, just put 3, 3, and 3 all the way down. And then you can adjust the scale again to really break it up. So I'll add the green, the dark green to this. You can actually make an even darker green if you want. We'll call this one Basic Evergreen. And again, you can unwrap this, you can paint it, you can break up the textures just by adding different colors to it. So I'm going to call this one Evergreen Tree. So I could be copying this around the scene. You can also make a copy of this. You can move it up, you can scale it down a bit, and then if we grab our trunk, we can put a trunk underneath this as well. So just another style of tree sitting in here. So we've got these big evergreens, these pines, and then we'll make another pine tree like this right here. So this one, let me just shift everything down a bit. So this one uses a custom shape at the bottom. Okay, so right now I have this one grouped together, but I'm going to create a new one here anyways. So we've got our base trunk again, and I'm going to start with a box shape for the bottom of this. So I'm going to click and drag like this. So I don't want any segments for height, but I do want one in the length and one in the width, just to create a cross section of edge loops here. Okay, so for this to work properly, I'm going to want to have the length and width the same. So for now I'm just going to punch in 12 by 12. Actually, sorry, 20 by 20. Okay, so now this is squared up. You can make sure it's centered to your trunk. Okay, so the height, I had that set to 2. We'll just make it 2. That way it's 20, 20, 2, 2, 2, and 1 here. Okay, so you can call this pine tree bottom. Or actually, sorry, we're going to make this pine tree top. Okay, so I'm going to take this, I'll convert it to editable poly, and then we're going to select all the polygons and remove the smoothing groups like we did with the trunk the first time. Okay, so this is down here. We're going to click clear all, and then we'll turn this off. And then for the next part, we can make this simple by right clicking on the object, and we'll go up to isolate selection. So it just temporarily isolates this from the rest of the scene so that we can work on it more easily. So all I want to do here is create a star shape out of this. So to do this, we're going to grab the verts on all of the sides here. So I'm going to hold Control, grab all the verts on the sides. So make sure you have them all selected like this. And then if you take your scale tool and you look down on this from the top, we're going to scale between X and Y only. So we're just going to scale this in, and we're creating this star shape. So this is going to be one of the parts of the tree here. Okay, so we can take all the verts on the corners now, just on the top. If you take these ones and move them down, it'll taper the ends in. And then you can hold Control and add the bottom verts as well. And then we'll just pull those down to create more of a slope. Okay, so all you have to do from here is you can grab the top vert and the bottom vert, and you can just pull these up until you get a nice even slope here. Okay, so now the bottom is concave and the top is pointing up, and this bottom one actually goes up too far. We can pull this down a bit, something more like this. Okay, so you can add your material to this. We'll do that now so that when we copy this around, it'll keep the material with it. So I'm going to right click, you can turn off vertex, I'm going to right click and end isolate, and then you'll see this at the bottom here. So what we're going to do now is move this up, and then we're going to hold shift and make a copy up. And what you can do from here is you can turn on angle snaps. So I'm going to right click and change my angle to 45. And then you can use your rotate tool and you can just snap this around 45 degrees. Okay, so I'm going to keep copying these. I'm going to rotate and I'm going to scale to taper this up. As you get towards the top, you can actually take this and we can stretch it out a bit. So I'm going to copy this again. I'm going to rotate it, scale it down a bit. But we're also going to stretch this by scaling it in the Z. So it gets a little bit longer at the top, longer and thinner. Until you create a nice point for the top of the tree. Okay, so you should get something like this. Might scale this one down a bit. And you can still select these and space them out a bit. So if you want to adjust how far they're sitting, just click and drag. Move them down. I'm going to hit Z to refocus on this. Okay, so we've got a pine tree here. So we have all these different trees in the scene. I'm going to move over to the other side and just show a couple more things here. Okay, so this one is basically just using what I've already shown with creating the branches. But if you want to add a bit of snow on here, you can grab a tree like this. Okay, so I'm going to jump back down to editable poly, and you're just taking the faces. So anywhere where you want to make it look like snow has built up, you can just take those faces and scale them up a bit. Okay, so if I scale it like this and then I hit grow at the top here, it'll grow the selection out. And then if you have a white material, you can just create a snow material. And assign it to the selection. Okay, so you can grab the edges here. You can see how this is kind of intersecting the tree. And I'll just pull this back a bit. If you want to switch it to local to make it easier, you can pull this straight back and down. Kind of taper this a bit. Okay, I'm actually going to switch that back to view. Okay, so I could go around the whole tree and add bits of snow like that, and you get something like this one here. So those are winter trees. Now these two here use a different technique where I've basically taken my first low poly tree. So we'll take this, I'm going to right click and isolate this, and I'll show you how to do this separate. Okay, so I've got this separate tree here. So what I want to do is, you can use any shape for this, it doesn't matter. You could even use a teapot. I'm not sure why you would, but you could. So I'm going to create a box just down here. I'm going to make sure there's no segments in this box. It's going to be as low poly as possible. And we'll just make this 3 by 3. Make it small. Okay, so the trick here is we want to take the box and scatter it around our low poly crown of this tree here. So I'm going to take this, we're going to go to the modify panel. Actually, sorry, we're going to go to the create panel, because we need to change this from standard primitives to compound objects. And this is where you're going to find the scatter option. So I'm going to click on scatter, and then there's options down here. So the first thing is pick distribution object, and we're going to make this an instance. Okay, so we don't want to have a whole bunch of copies of this object, because that's going to slow things down. We want to make an instance, so it's just referencing the first object over and over again. So I'm going to click pick distribution object, and I'll click on the crown of the tree. And at first you're not really going to see anything because it's only copied this box one time. So from here we need to go down, and under duplicates you're going to crank this up. Okay, so now you can see it's copying more of the box around the tree, and it's just filling this up. So you could put as many as you want. Obviously if you crank it too high, it's going to look a little bit weird. The base scale, you can change the percent here, so you might want to cut this back a bit. Vertex chaos, if you adjust this, it's going to twist the vertices around. Okay, so it's kind of adding a noise to the box and twisting it up. So you can make it look less like boxes just by adjusting this. And then you can crank up the duplicates a bit more. It gets to a point where it doesn't really look like it's filling it anymore, it's just overlapping. Okay, so between this and the scale, you can try to fill this tree out with boxes. There's also options down here. Okay, so you can change how this spreads over the surface, so you can have the whole area, make it even, you can make it random faces. So there's just different options to change how this breaks it up. So vertex is just copying these on all the vertices here. Okay, so we'll make this random. I'll actually just leave it on even for now. So the other thing you'll want to do though is go down to display, and you want to hide the distribution object. Okay, in some cases you might want to keep this on, but basically this is going to either show or hide the object that we've copied the boxes on top of. Okay, so underneath here is that low poly tree object, or the crown of the original tree. If you wanted to hide that, you could turn this off, and then you're going to have a hole in there. So you can select the original tree underneath here. Okay, so you could take this out and you could delete it, and then you're just left with this. So if I was to render this now, you can see it's just a bunch of boxes stacked together or scattered over that area. So there's a few holes in here, which is kind of neat. You might want to leave that like that. Okay, I'm going to hit undo just to bring back the original, and I'll actually grab these and hold shift, make a copy of that over there, and then I'll take this scattered object on this one and delete it, and then we're back to the original here. Okay, so I'm just going to do this one more time with a different shape. So you can use any of your standard primitives or extended primitives, any shape you create. You can even use plane. If you wanted to map leaves onto a plane and scatter it, you could do it this way. We'll create another geosphere though, and we'll just make a low poly bunch here. Okay, so super low poly. So I could do the same thing where I go to compound objects, and actually I'm going to add a material to this as well. Okay, so compound objects, scatter, pick the object we're scattering across, and then scroll down and crank up the duplicates. Okay, so if I wanted this to be bigger, I would have had to make the original object bigger. So the base scale is only going to scale down, it doesn't scale up. Okay, but we can create something like this, and I'm going to hit undo, and we're going to take this original object before we used scatter, and we're going to make it bigger. So we'll try scattering this bigger piece. Okay, so I'm going to crank up the duplicates again. So now we've got a much bigger piece being scattered. You can scale this down a bit if you want to. I'm going to leave it big and chunky like that. And again, you can change the vertex chaos to break it up a bit. Okay, so I'm going to take this and go back down to display, and we'll hide the distribution object again. And we're going to take the original object and we'll get rid of it again. Okay, so now we've got this big top with, and you can move this up even, but we've got this big top with a few holes in it. So there's a few different ways you could break up the material on here. One thing you could do is create a multi-sub-object material, so I'll show how to do that. Okay, so I'll take this one here. I'm going to call this multi-tree. Change it from standard to multi-sub-object, and then you can click OK here. We're going to set the number to however many different colors you want. So I'll just make this 3. So I've got 3 IDs in here, and I'm just going to take ones that I've already made and copy them in here. So you can make them an instance, and if you wanted to make changes, you can change the original here. It'll update in the instance. Okay, so if I take this and I apply it to the top of this tree, okay, so I'm going to close this. So just remember I have ID 1, 2, and 3 here. Now if I was to go into this and add an edit poly modifier, then you can go around and you can select a few different bits and pieces here, and we'll just change the ID. Okay, so if I grab these and I scroll down to polygon material IDs, which should be just above smoothing groups. You can set the ID to 1, 2, or 3 since we have 3 of them. So I'll just go around the bottom here and select a few more. And I'll make this one 3. Okay, so now we have 3 different materials being used. Okay, so there's all different shapes and sizes and designs of trees you can make just using the basic modifiers. So we didn't do a whole lot of poly modeling. We're doing a lot of using different modifiers. Excuse me. And just to show you, if I go back to scatter and click hold yes, you can still randomize this a bit, so you can still change the duplicates and all this stuff in here. Just by changing the duplicates a little bit, you can randomize the tree. Okay, I'll click end isolate, and then you can look at these trees. So we've pretty much covered all of these trees. The birch tree, I just added a different material to different parts of the tree, and these are just these spheres that have been scaled out, skewed a bit. Okay, so those would be easy enough to make now that you've gone through this. Okay, so I'm going to save this file out, and then we'll unhide the rest of the scene, and I'll just go through making some of the terrain a bit. Okay, so I'm going to save, and then we'll come back to this. Okay, so I'm just going to pop up to my layer explorer, and we're going to unhide the rest of the scene. Okay, so I've got these clouds back here, and the clouds are pretty simple. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'll show you how to do the clouds right now first. So let's hide these trees and the background. Just have the clouds here. Okay, so if you look at these clouds, you can tell it's just the same as the tops of the trees. Okay, so we've already done this. You can make a geosphere, and you can basically scale this out and create a cloud like this one here. Okay, so I've got an edit poly modifier in here, so if you wanted to, you could go in and you could grab the sides like this and pull them out, stretch it a little bit more. And I'm using soft selection with this as well. Okay, so if you turn on soft selection, you'll see this rainbow of colors showing you the fall off of how far out it's reaching. Okay, so this is selecting here 100%, and then it's falling off to 0% back here. So you can create some different shapes for the clouds using the same thing. Geosphere, you can use the edit poly modifier to change this up a bit. And then we've got noise and the UV map again. You don't need the UV map, this is just a color on here. So this doesn't really need to be here. The UV map would be for if you're going to add that paper texture map or bump map or something like that. Okay, so these ones, these groups here, I'll go through those in a minute. Okay, so we'll zoom into this. So this is basically the same thing where I've created a geosphere, and I'll make this one off to the side here. Okay, just make sure this is the active layer. Okay, so if you create your geosphere like this, I'm just going to line this up here. So I'll make these a little puffier. I'm going to add more segments to them. And you'll notice that there's an option here for hemisphere. So smoothing is turned off again, but I've got hemisphere on here. And I'll just apply this white material. Now you'll notice that my clouds here that I already had created are glowing a bit. They're a little bit lighter. Okay, so if you go into your, I'll make a new material here for clouds. And we'll make them white. You can even add a touch of blue to these. And then I want to turn up the self illumination right here, so I'm going to make this something like 30, just to give it a bit of a lighter material. Okay, so these are going to light up in the sky a bit better. So I can take this, and again you can add your noise and all that stuff to it. Okay, so I'll break this one up with 3, 3, and 3, and then adjust the scale. So you can take this, you can even stretch this out a bit if you want, you can reshape it however, and then just make some copies like this, and just make sure they all intersect. I'll change the seed. Okay, so changing the seed on this isn't really doing too much. We'd have to really crank the scale or the strength of the noise up more. But then once you copy this out a few times, you can make it as big as you want. You're just going to copy this up again, make sure this is a copy, and put the geosphere back to normal. So turn off the hemisphere, and then we're just copying this around again. Okay, so you can take these, you can scale them, you can change the seed on the noise here, you can rotate these around just to throw it off a bit. And you can just make different shapes here. So once you've created a cloud like this, you would take all these pieces and group them together, and you could just name it cloud. Okay, so you'll notice that the edges on this are blue, and I'll just point out that I've added a material to this, so now if I change the color over here, it actually changes the color of the edges on your object. Okay, this one here, we'll go over that one real quick. So if you want to make these custom kind of illustrated looking swirls, so different design to the clouds, I'm just using the line tool for this. Okay, so it would help if you had a drawing or a design that you're referencing, but if you use the line tool, you can just click and create a low poly shape like this. So I'm not clicking and dragging. If I drag, it creates a Bezier. So I'm just going to make sure that I click each point, and I'll turn off that grid. So I hit G to turn the grid off. Okay, so if you create a shape something like this, then I'm going to right click to end, and you can jump back into the modify panel, and under rendering you want to turn on these two checkboxes, so enable in renderer and enable in viewport. And then we're going to set this to rectangular, and you're going to turn up the width and the length. So the width is the one we're going to see in the view right now. So we'll just say we'll make this 4 and 4, and you'll notice how right now it's overlapping. So I'm going to go around the side of this, and I'm going to go down to vertex, and I'm going to take some of these, and I'm going to just separate the front from the back. If you hit F3, you'll go into wireframe, and you can see the vertex ticks in here a little bit better. Okay, so you can hit F3 to turn that on and off. Alright, so once you've got something like this, I'm going to hit F and Z to zoom. You can further change the shape just by adding the Edit Poly modifier on top of this. And then I'm going to grab the vertices here and just kind of start scaling things out a bit and making different shapes. So I'm going to taper this end in, push this one out a bit, and taper the ends over here. Okay, so the other thing is if you go back to the line, I'm going to click hold yes. Down here under rectangular, you can change the angle. So if you twist the angle around, you can push the bottom out and then you'll get this better looking beveled shape. So the bottom of this is going to catch the shadow. And then if you go up to editable poly, you'll still see, or edit poly, you'll still see the same result. Okay, so you can play with the angle, you can add your material, and then you could name this cloud swirl. Okay, so once you have a few different clouds, you can copy those around and fill up the scene with clouds. So at this point, I'm going to unhide the rest of the scene. And I'm going to turn off my edged faces. And I'm just going to set up the same scene off to the side here. Okay, so I'll just create the terrain. Okay, so I'll make the grass and the river. And then we'll have a look at creating just a basic mountain or something in the background that we can paint the trees on. Okay, so I'll make sure I'm in perspective. And basically, if you go to the top view, okay, so I'm going to go to the top view and zoom out, and I'm going to create a couple of shapes using the line tool. Okay, so first I'll start clicking around the top here. So I'm going to make the top half of the terrain here, and then the bottom half. I'm going to make these two separate objects, and then the river will be a separate object as well. So if I click like this, I can make the outside of the terrain, just like a box. And then I'm going to click through here and just kind of create this broken river section here. Okay, so that's one part. I'm going to close the spline, yes. So you'll see that it remembers that I turned on enable in renderer and viewport. I want to turn those off this time. Okay, so those are turned off. I'm going to create the other part of my river down here, so you can just follow kind of the shape of your river here. Okay, so the river banks aren't going to be perfect, so they don't have to follow exact. And then we'll create the outside for the rest of the terrain. And I'll click yes. And then I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to create another shape inside here following the riverbed, and this is going to be for the water. Okay, so I'm going to come out here and I'm going to go up here and continue this all as one shape. And then we'll close this off here. Click yes. So I'll take all of these and we'll right click and convert them to editable poly. Okay, so now we have three custom shapes here that are just flat right now. So you can see the Z fighting in there, they're all overlapping. Okay, so first I'll take these two pieces here and we'll add a green material to them just to separate them out for now. So you can take these, you can actually take these two pieces and attach them. Okay, so now I have one piece that I'll call the terrain. And you can select the top of these pieces and we can extrude this up. And I'm just going to look real close here. If I use extrude, I'm going to pull this up like this. Okay, so you can even use the select and move tool to further pull this up. And then I want to extrude this one more time, so I have a line in here to separate. So I'm going to hit F3 to make sure I see this edge, or F4. But basically I'm going to use this to separate two different materials. Okay, so while I have this selected, I'm going to hit grow. And if you wanted to change the grass material, you could do it now. Otherwise, I'm going to hit Control I to invert the selection, and we'll create another material for the mud or the ground or the dirt. We'll call it mud riverbed, and then we're going to change this to a brown. Okay, so I'm going to click Assign Material to Selection, and then we have that set out like that. Okay, so I could still select this by grabbing the tops. I could hit Grow, and if I wanted to change this, I could scale this to make the grass shorter or longer, but this is just the top. And then you can grab your water and move the water up. Now if we want to break this up and make it look really bumpy, first of all we'll break up the water and make it look wavy. Because we made a shape, the top is just one surface right now, one polygon. So we're going to add a modifier called Subdivide. Okay, so this is just basic subdivision. It's called Subdivide. And if you change the size, you can scale this down. You can see how it'll break the surface up. So this is also good for things like cloth, or when you're trying to simulate anything like cloth or water or anything that has to bend or add noise to it. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to add noise on top of this. So if you add the noise modifier, and you want to make sure you have enough segments in here to break this up. So the more we subdivide, the more the noise is going to break this up. You don't want to subdivide it too far. If it's too dense, it could freeze your computer, so you have to be careful. But I'm going to take the noise here, and we'll just start with the same 3, 3, and 3, and then change the scale. Okay, so the scale, you can see it's just breaking up the water, making it a little more rough. You could turn on fractal to break this up differently, but we're just going to go into the strength and bump this up further. Okay, so you could really crank this up if you want it to look really wavy. And it's really the Z that we're looking at. So the Z is the height. So it just depends how wavy you want this to be. If I want this to be tighter, I'm going to have to go into Subdivide and bring this down. Okay, so the more segments in here, the rougher you can make the water look. So the other thing is, down here at Editable Poly, you want to make sure Smoothing Groups is turned off. Okay, so let's clear these out of here, and then when you go back up here, this is going to look better. Okay, so before there was some weird black shadows in here, and that's because it was trying to smooth the surface together, and we just turned off the smoothing groups to get rid of that. Okay, so some real choppy river water in there. Now if you want to add a material to this, I've got this set up to render with Mental Ray. So if you go to Rendering, Render Setup, just make sure you're using Mental Ray in here. You don't have to, you can use Scanline, but the material I'm going to show you now is a Mental Ray material. So I'm going to change this one from Standard, and under Mental Ray you've got Arc and Design. So some of these are good materials for realistic shading. If you're trying to do metal or wood surfaces or anything glossy, you can use this. But we're actually just going to steal the water material out of here. So we want this Transparent Materials, Water Reflective Surface, Thin Geometry. Okay, so it's a fast rendering water. And you'll notice that the diffuse level is set to 0.1. So if you want to use the color on this, you can set this up to 1. And then you can change the color right here. But basically this is going to reflect the environment back on the surface. So you can change the color of the water to whatever, and then apply this here. And then when you render this, I'll give this a shot. Some pretty decent looking water for a quick render. Okay, so again, we're going for the low poly look. If I wanted it to look realistic, like real water, I could subdivide this further and smooth it out a bit. But if you look real close, you'll notice that there's a bump map used with this water texture as well. Okay, so again, if you think it's too choppy, just go back to your noise and cut the Z back a bit, and then it won't look as rough. Okay, so that's not too bad. I'm going to hit cancel here. So I think I'm going to take the terrain and just grab the very top, and I'll make this a bit smaller. Okay, so you can break the terrain up the same way. If you want this to be rough terrain, you can do the same thing. You can subdivide this. Okay, so if I add subdivide, make sure you can see your edges, hit F4. Then you can scale this down. Okay, so you can go down as far as you want and then add a noise on top again. So we'll go with 3, 3, and 3, and then we'll adjust the scale. Okay, so this will just break up the ground and make it look a little bumpier. And again, with this, you want to make sure it's not trying to smooth everything together. So to keep it low poly, you're going to go in here and clear out the smoothing groups. Okay, and then you'll get something like this. Okay, so it's kind of low poly game art looking, but this is going to render fast, and we could cover the surface with other things. Okay, so you've almost got this pixelated shading in here, but we didn't even add a texture map. We've just broken the surface up. Okay, so that's not too bad. I'm going to hit cancel. Okay, so for these mountains back here, I'm just going to grab this and copy it over, and I'll just show you how this was created. So you'll see there's a bunch of things in the modifier stack here. You can create these any way you want. This is basically a plane, and now that we've gone through some of these techniques, you could probably figure this out on your own, but I'm going to just turn off each modifier so you can see what's happening here, and I'll explain it. So we've started with a plane, and if I hit F4, you're going to see that there's some segments in this plane. Okay, so this plane, if I jump down here, the segments are 20 by 20, and then this just allowed me to add a noise to break this up and make it look bumpy. So adding the noise also allowed me to add an edit poly modifier, and with the edit poly modifier I could grab the vertices and start pulling them up just to create the mountains like this. Okay, so you can use vertex and you can use soft selection, and you can grab sections like this and just pull them up. Once you get something like that, you can subdivide this to add more edges. Okay, so if I subdivide this, it just adds the edges in here, and then it just gives you more faces to pick. So in this case, I wanted to have the tops look like snow, so there's snow peaks up here. So by subdividing, I could add another edit poly modifier, which would allow me to select specific pieces like this, and then I could add a white material to them to separate it. So you could unwrap this and paint it, but in this case we're just using the modifiers to break it up and separate the materials. So just keep in mind, when you use edit poly, you have to create separate material IDs. You can't just pick pieces like this and then try to assign a material to it, because it's going to assign it to the whole object. With the edit poly modifier, you actually have to create a multi-sub-object material like this and separate the material IDs down here. Okay, so the UV map modifier is only on here because I was playing around with the paper texture, and I'll show that again after. Okay, so you can create this landscape however you want, just using these low poly techniques so far. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these trees that we just made. Okay, so I'm going to look at this one here. This is the one that we made earlier. And I'm going to use this as an example for painting objects. So I'm going to take this bottom of this tree, and you want to take the bottom because you want the pivot to stay at the bottom for this. You could always move the pivot afterwards, but we'll just pick it up from here. So now I'm going to collapse this. I'm going to convert this to editable poly. And I'm going to use attach and just attach all the pieces. So each time I attach, I'm going to match material to material ID. Okay, so I'm going to do that for each piece. Make sure I get them all in here. And at this point, I'm going to rename this pine tree. Okay, so if I take this, if it's all attached, I should be able to move it. So it doesn't really matter where you put this, but we're going to take it over to this other one here, this other landscape. And what we're going to do now is we're going to use this object and we're going to paint the object all over the scene. So for this, you need to go up to your ribbon. So make sure the ribbon is on, like this. And you want to go to Object Paint. Okay, so Object Paint is pretty self-explanatory if you read through each piece. So you're going to start from left to right. The first thing you're going to do is click this button here. So we're painting with the selected object. Okay, there's other options in here, but we want to use the object that we have selected, which is the tree. So now this tree is loaded in to the brush. Okay, so if you move over here, we want to paint on the scene. If you wanted to paint on a specific object, you could choose a specific object, or you can paint on the grid, but we want to leave it at scene. The offset is just going to push the object off the surface. So if our pivot point didn't quite line up with the bottom, and we want to make sure the trees are in the ground, we could push the offset into the negative, and I'll show this after. Alignment, we're aligning everything in the Z-axis. And spacing is what we're going to want to adjust for sure. So depending on your scene scale, you'll have to adjust the spacing. So you see this little video pops up and it explains what the tool does, but I've done this before in the scene, so I know I want to put this up to about 450. Okay, so if you have this too low, when you go to paint the objects, it's just going to smear them. So I've adjusted the spacing, and now I can paint these all over the place. Okay, so the other thing is, over here, you want to have a look at this. So we've got, right now it's going to paint the trees evenly, so each tree is going to be the same height. So you can change this to random, and then you can tell it either side of 100% how big. So we can say the smallest tree is 40% and the biggest tree is 140%. So you could put in whatever numbers. You could experiment with this, and then this way, now when I paint these, it's going to paint across the surface like this, and you can see how these sharp angles over here, it's actually painting the tree along the surface here. So if you have any sharp angles like this, like I'm trying to paint this tree on a mountain like this, it's gonna show up rotated like that. You can always grab these after and you can rotate them back like this. Okay, so but just as an example, I'll go over here and create a sphere like this, and then we'll grab our tree, and you can pick any tree. If you want to change the object that you're painting, you just select the object and click this button again, and then I can paint again. So it's just painting over the surface on the local normal. So you could quickly fill this whole scene with trees, and if you want the scale difference to be larger, then I could make this like 340, and then you'll get some really big trees. So any adjustments you make up here affect all the trees that you just painted as well. Okay, so we could quickly populate this. Again, if I want to make a different tree, so I'll go over here and grab this one since it's just one piece. then I can click on paint with selected object and start filling in some trees like this. Okay, so if I want to find another tree that I have attached here already, let's take this one here actually. Actually, let's use the birch tree. So I'm going to rename this one birch. Okay, so it doesn't even matter if I leave this over here. It's still selected. I'm going to turn off attach, and then I can load this into the paintbrush and I can start painting these trees as well. Okay, so this one is a little too big, so I'm going to make this 140 or 150. And we can scatter some birch trees in here too. Okay, so when you're done with this, you can turn off your ribbon and you can have a render to see how it looks. I'm going to get rid of this sphere though, and then I'll have to get rid of these trees as well. Okay, so in some cases you're definitely going to want to go in and rotate the trees back up if you've painted on a really wicked angle like this, but it's not that big of a deal. Okay, so you can see how fast these trees render. If you were to try and use the max trees or a tree that was full of alpha maps and leaves, it would obviously take a lot longer to render this out. So again, if you're going for the low poly style, this is perfect. If you're just trying to fill in trees in the distance that you're not going to be close up on, you can use these trees as well. And then you can use more realistic trees up close. And you can cut down on the render time, big time. Okay, so the last thing I'll talk about real quick is the lighting. So all I have set up for this scene is, and I'm going to focus back over here now, I have a skylight and I have a spotlight, and that's it. Just a standard area spotlight. Okay, so I'll recreate these lights real quick. Oops. Okay, so you're going to go to the create panel, back to lights, and we're going to change it to standard lights. We're using standard lights for this, not photometric lights. So we're just using standard lights. And we're using, because I have mental ray set up, I'm just using the bottom two with the skylight. So if you're going to add a skylight, you're going to want to go up to rendering, render setup, and just go into global illumination and set your skylight from IBL, image-based lighting, to just final gather. Okay, it's going to render quicker. We're not using image-based lighting in this scene, so I'm just going to use final gather. And then you can create a area spotlight, and this is going to be the key light or the sunlight. So I'll just go through the properties here before I create this one. So you want to use ray trace shadows, okay, not advanced ray trace, just ray trace shadows. The intensity, because I'm using a skylight, I usually drop the intensity down to 0.7, and then you can add a tint of color to this light if you want. Okay, so now I'm going to click and drag towards the scene. So I'm dragging a target on the scene, and then you're going to take your light and move it up in the sky wherever the sun should be placed. Okay, so this is our sunlight shining down on the scene. And then if you go into your modify panel again, under intensity is spotlight parameters, and down here you can change the hotspot and the fall off. So you want to make sure both of these cover the entire scene for this. Okay, so we want the whole scene to be illuminated by this light. So the hotspot and fall off are going to be expanded past the scene. And then if you want softer shadows, so there's two things you can do. Under shadow parameters, you can change the color of the shadow. If you decrease the density, it'll just make it more of a gray shadow, a softer shadow color. But then for the edges, you're going to go under area light parameters. And I'll usually change this to disk and then bump the radius up to, in a scene like this, maybe 15 feet. If you find your shadows are really grainy, you can increase the samples here, but this should be fine. So I'll just zoom in here a bit and see how these shadows look. Okay, so you can see the shadows coming off the trees here, and if you find the edges are too sharp, if you want to soften these up, you can see I have these little raccoons sticking in here. I should have moved them. Okay, so if I want to soften these shadows even more, I need to make the radius even bigger on this. So if I was to crank this up to 30, we could try this again. You can also turn on realistic shading, and you should get a preview of kind of how soft the shadows are. So if I really crank up the radius in here, you should see it update in here as it does a pre-render. So the size of the radius on your shadows is going to depend on the size of the scene, the scale of the trees and everything in here. But as this shadow tapers out to the end, you should see it's softer up at the top here. Okay, so I'm going to cancel that for now. So the last thing I'll look at for now is if you go up to rendering under environment. So in here is where you can change your background color. So I've got my background color set to orange right now. You can also change the ambient. Okay, so I'm going to do a render from here. I'm going to hold Shift Q. Once this render completes, I'll hit the little clone rendered window frame up here, or clone rendered frame window. And that's just going to make a copy of this render so we can compare the next one. So with the default ambient set to black, you get some nice dark shadows around everything in the scene here. And I'm going to clone this window. And I'm going to go back here and I'm going to change this to an orange color. Okay, so if I make this a bright orange, it's going to brighten up the entire scene quite a bit. So I'll just show what that looks like. Okay, so now you can see everything's really bright, a little bit over bright. So I'm going to cancel that real quick. If I want to keep this hint of orange in here, I'm going to make sure it's a darker orange, and then I'll give this another try. Okay, so now everything has this kind of orange ambient light to it, and the shadows underneath have a touch of an orange hue to them. Okay, so just if you find that your shadows and your overall lighting and textures are too dark, you can change the global ambient lighting up here. You can also control the ambient lighting on each material individually. Okay, so here's the difference with the standard ambient. Here's with the orange lighter ambient. Okay, so it really brightens up the scene quite a bit. And if you hit M to open up the material editor, let's just close all this. You'll notice that all my materials now have this global ambient applied to them. Okay, if you go into a material, you'll notice you have ambient and diffuse. If I unlock these, you can change the ambient and you can control this separately. Okay, so if you have a specific material that you want to change the ambient color on, you can do that by unlocking it here. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up. It's been a pretty long video. We've covered pretty much everything in this scene so far, and it's pretty low poly and basic stuff, but you can see you can really create a pretty cool scene really fast using this.